morning, honorable guests, colleagues, and friends, and thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin our presentation, we would like to acknowledge that I am speaking from the traditional territories of the Treaty 7 people in southern Alberta, comprising of the Siksika, the Piikani, the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nations, the Stoney Nakoda First Nations, and Métis Nation of Alberta, Region 3. And my colleagues Riya, Sirkhell, and Boyd Hayes are speaking from the unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh Nations. We honor and celebrate their territories and thank them for providing us with an opportunity to engage and live as guests on their land. We would like to thank Ujwal Neopane, a graduate student at Tribhuvan University, for his constant support and coordination before and during our fieldwork. And we are also very thankful and have been honored to work with Rabi Karmacharya and Trishala Hirachan at OLE Nepal. Since 2007, our client's vision was to act as a social benefit organization dedicated to enhancing the quality and access to education and the integration of technology in classrooms. Through our communication and our research, we are pleased to present our findings on disparity and disconnection with regards to impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic on education in Nepal. Next slide, please. Some students in remote areas have not even attended online classes because of no access to electricity, devices, internet, and the inability of parents to help them with classes. This was a quote spoken by the mother of a 6-year-old student from the Sindupalchok municipality, which is one of the rural regions we studied. It directly speaks to the overlapping challenges faced by everyday parents in which our project aims to address. Next slide, please. The COVID-19 pandemic has affected more than 90% of the global student population, causing one of the largest disruptions in the history of formal education. Nepal has been no exception to this. It has had a long history of challenges in delivering quality education to its population, and those pre-existing concerns have hampered the Nepali education sector's response to this global pandemic. Then this presents us with our problem. The COVID-19 pandemic has posed significant delivery challenges to public education in Nepal, specifically the limited technological integration as schools slowly reopen, and the already existing disparities in access to quality education across urban and rural settings, genders, and income levels have been exacerbated. Next slide, please. So then let us consider the life of two students, 6-year-old boy, Bibek, and his 13-year-old sister, Sushmita. Sushmita starts her day by waking up early to prepare breakfast for her and her brother. They've just received news that they are unable to go to school this week, so they will have to learn from home. Schools have been closed indefinitely, and there is no news on when they may be reopening. They have one laptop between them as a family and have to share and alternate their use of the equipment. Sushmita cannot get her brother to sit still for breakfast as he keeps running about. The children's mother is off to work, and by the time Bibek finishes his breakfast and is ready to start school, the power goes off. Sushmita then realizes that she cannot learn on her laptop and begins trying to read through her books while her brother plays out loud. While the power turns back on, the kids sit in front of the laptop but cannot log into it. They call their mother on her phone, but she is unable to provide them with guidance due to her limited familiarity with the technology. In the past, the children used their teacher's help to log in, but they cannot reach their teachers today. Sushmita then tries to get Bibek to listen to the educational radio program, but he's playing games and remains uninterested. By the end of the day, she has done very little learning, but is anxious that she has to pass her board exams, which are usually worth about 50% of her mark. Sushmita and Bibek live in a rural area. I will now pass it on to my colleague, Riya.
Thank you, Nabila. The story that was just shared was aimed to place your focus on the urgency to continue supporting children's education amidst the COVID-19 pandemic. Before we take a closer look at education in Nepal, we want to lay out 4 broad strategic priorities for a more robust and adaptive education system in Nepal. These are informed by our research and conversations with stakeholders through the course of the last year. The first one is engaging a broad range of stakeholders in the policy and program planning for education. We found this particularly true for parents and local administration who had a crucial role in educational support and implementation during remote learning in the pandemic. However, had very little to no resources at their disposal and felt unprepared to support children to continue learning. The second one is content for new platforms. The majority of population in Nepal do not have access to advanced technological devices or sustained internet facilities, and there is a dearth of digital learning content for simple mobile phones. Hence, it is useful to create learning content for simple devices which do not require robust internet access. The third, teacher training by government and civil society during the pandemic has been uneven and ineffective without any substantive training for teaching learning strategies in remote setups. As a result of which, teachers have replicated lessons from physical classes where children faced an attention deficit and weren't engaged in the online classes. This hampered their progress and also the teacher's ability to assess their progress. Hence, we recommend a targeted and deliberate attempt to train teachers in digital learning strategies and application based learning tools. Lastly, we want to emphasize the importance of an adaptive and resilient education system that is able to adapt to the ever changing circumstances. While the COVID-19 pandemic has been a global shock affecting most education systems, it has affirmed the need to build easily adaptable systems. In this context, it's important for Nepal to move towards infrastructural advancements and systematic shifts in education delivery. Next slide, please. Taking a closer look at the state of public education in Nepal. Majority of the students in Nepal attend public schools, and we found that only 12% of these public schools have the capacity to offer information and communication based technology along with adequate internet connectivity. This points to a major lag between educational infrastructure and moving to remote learning contexts. A recent UNICEF survey reported that 52%, which is more than half of the student population in Nepal, completely stopped attending classes and learning when schools were first closed in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic. This points to large learning losses which have occurred but are yet to be quantified uh, during the pandemic. Finally, even pre-pandemic, the latest government report on learning outcomes reports that 70% of the students fell below the level of competencies expected by the curriculum, pointing to the ineffectiveness in how education is being delivered. The pandemic is sure to have exacerbated these disparities, and there is a need to focus on more engaging teaching strategies and application-based learning. Next slide, please. We will now move on to our primary research findings, for which we have had the good fortune to virtually speak to parents, teachers, civil society members, including local NGOs and international funders, along with local government officials in Nepal. Their inputs have been truly insightful and have informed our policy challenges and recommendations. I will now pass it on to my colleague Boyd to share our research findings.
Thank you so much, Riya. As we just said, while up-to-date and accurate data remains elusive regarding education in Nepal during the COVID-19 crisis, we found great value in the candid insights provided to us by local stakeholders who are on the ground and dealing with these challenges on a day-to-day basis. And from our engagements with them, we derived 4 essential categories of challenges that kind of ran through each of our meetings. The first is a lack of technological infrastructure. This includes not just the shortage of laptops and cell phones, tablets, but also, as has been referenced, intermittent and often non-existent internet connectivity, as well as intermittent electricity. And this spans both rural and urban settings, where parents told us that internet could be out or electricity could be out for significant portions of the day on any day of the week. Next is the disconnect between civil society and government. This includes not only a shortage of communication and coordination between the new federalized levels of government in Nepal, but also outward communication between the government and civil society and coordination between civil society organizations. So we heard from civil society members that there may be one organization that rolls out a program regarding education on 1 week in one town, and then the next week a different organization completely ignorant of the previous program runs the same program in the same place, and it's not only a waste of funding, but it could be easily avoided, and it leaves other people untouched where there's help needed in regard to educational support. The next is unpreparedness to support and deliver online learning. I think this was a particularly valuable insight, largely given to us by parents. When education has to happen at home, parents become a much more important factor in education, more important than they normally are. And we heard from parents across the board, as well as teachers, that parents often didn't have the know-how to help their kids in remote learning. Parents talked about, not just being unable to help them with the interface and the technology, but not being able to aid in the content of maths and sciences and English and Nepali language and things like that. Some parents chose to educate the children in other ways. They call them life skills, but the core content and curriculum couldn't be supported by many parents. And finally, as we've referenced, geographical and gendered inequality was a common thread throughout all of our interviews. Of course, this takes the rural-urban form, as we've discussed, but largely what came to the surface, certainly from civil society organizations and parents, was that daughters and girls face an unequal and gendered burden of care and work in the home. And whether that's happening during school hours or after or before, it can detract significantly from their studies. And when there isn't the barrier of physically being at school to keep them involved, it can be so much easier for them to get caught up in the work at home, rather than their actual homework for school. So from these challenges, we derived a set of next steps that we think OLE can take to address some of these issues. First and foremost is an information campaign for parents and caregivers. This can take the form of infographics or simple posts, 3-step directions on how to log your children into class, or a set of resources for help with tutoring. And this can be disseminated on Facebook, which is a platform most Nepalis access on a day-to-day basis, or on WhatsApp, posters, radio ads. The point is to get parents more involved in the education process and give them more tools to work with. The next is an online toolkit for remote teaching learning strategies, particularly for teachers. While there is teacher training happening within OLE and within the government, aiming that teaching and that training on specifically teaching remotely, which is a whole different set of challenges, is what we're talking about here. And OLE currently does offer some online toolkits that are free access, but our suggestion here is to tailor those to online and remote teaching strategies. And all of these things hinge on creating content in ways that hasn't been created before. Particularly, we're talking about less so the haves and the have-nots in the Nepali technology and internet scene, but more so the have-less. The millions of Nepalis who access small amounts of data on simple phones every day. They are connecting with the internet. They aren't completely cut off from the internet, but they just take in small text-based or small photos, small videos in low quality. And if content can be created, not just for parents and teachers, but also educational content for students on those kinds of platforms, so many more students can be reached in that manner. So I'll leave you with a few final considerations. OLE Nepal, for over a decade, has taken a passion for innovation and adaptivity in education, to use ICT to help more kids learn and grow in exciting and fun ways. This is an exciting opportunity for them to adjust their methods and to take a look to the future. Already, COVID-19 is not the most recent thing to close schools down on a mass level in Nepal. Closures are going to continue, and OLE and other organizations will need to continue to adapt and take a look to the future for remote learning and other methods. As we've mentioned, I think one of the key features of this is going to be involving more stakeholders, particularly parents and local government administration. The disconnect between national decision makers, local government decision makers, school decision makers, and parents at home who are on the front lines was glaring in our work. And so coordinating all of them together and providing resources for all of them to work in synergy will be vital. And while OLE and other civil society organizations can do as much and can and must do as much as they can to address these learning situations, a lot of this is going to be contingent upon budget allocations for ICT infrastructure at community level, in schools and in homes. And this has a lot to do with the federal government in Nepal and international donors. So as OLE continues to press for different programming and adjusting their work, they will also need to be involved in advocating at a policy level for those changes. And finally, I want to note that as researchers, we were also students during the COVID-19 pandemic. And while Nepal faces a very unique set of circumstances, struggling with education and communication and coordination during the COVID-19 crisis is not a Nepali problem. It's a global problem that we've all faced, including here in BC and throughout Canada and the rest of the world. And so we hope that while our research is very focused on Nepal, we hope that our findings can be useful to in other jurisdictions, at least in a comparative context, if not directly applicable. And I'll pass it back to Nabila to close us out.
Thank you so much, Boyd. And thank you all for listening to our presentation. We'll now open it up to the question and answer portion.